You often hear me say that God gave you a brain, He expects you to use it. You also often hear me say that you need to make a logical and reasonable argument out of the scriptures. And if you cannot make a logical and reasonable argument for what you believe, then it's highly possible that what you believe is completely inerrant. We know that Paul in Acts 17 is making a reasonable argument from the scriptures. So beginning in Acts 17 verse 1, here's what it says. Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Then Paul, as his custom was, went into them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and demonstrating that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded, and a great multitude of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women, joined Paul and Silas. So it says, Paul, this was his custom, this is what he did. He's going to go in and going to reason with them from the scriptures. And it says some of them were persuaded, which means some people understood. But it also means that some people didn't, because some people cannot make a logical or reasonable argument out of the scriptures. You should be able to make a logical and reasonable argument for what you believe. But there are people that cannot. And what happens is, if you can't make a logical or reasonable argument, you name call, get angry, or something else that is much worse. So I'm going to jog your memory here. If you remember 5-6 years ago, right, you had to wear a face diaper, or you had to have something in your arm, and you couldn't have a job if you didn't, because you were responsible for somebody else's health, right? That's the logical argument that they tried to pin on you, that you were responsible. But they also said, if you recall and you think back, that anybody who said anything in this cancel culture 10 or 15 years ago, those people should be canceled. They cannot have a job. They can't have income. They should lose everything they have. We should take all of their money. They should live destitute and poor, because 10 or 15 years ago, whatever was said, that at the time maybe it was inappropriate, but it certainly wasn't crossing the line. But now, however, in this culture, it's not something we can say. For example, children used to get married quite young. They don't get married at 14 and 15 anymore. People used to be able to drink and drive. They don't anymore. It's against the law. So we try to take things that happened in the past and put a spin on, well, according to today, like you drove drunk in 1969, so therefore, well, back then, and I don't know, I'm just making that up, but you get the point, right? So we have people who can't make a logical and reasonable argument. But in speaking about cancel culture and people's words that were used against them 5 years ago or so to cancel them so they could no longer be gainfully employed, now we have people who are losing their jobs. And this kind of alludes to a video that aired a couple of days ago. And these same people who probably wanted somebody to be canceled for something that they said 15 years ago, now for their horrific and vile comments, are losing their jobs. See, we can't have a double standard. If we're going to ban everyone from having a future for something they said 10 or 15 years ago, then something that you said last week should apply as well. So we've all probably said things that we shouldn't, but the issue is that that same logical and reasonable argument, if you said something 10 or 15 years ago and now you are canceled and you can no longer have an audience, you can no longer have a platform, you can no longer be allowed to speak, you can no longer support your family because you have been canceled. Now we see people being canceled for things that they said recently. So if we're going to make a logical and reasonable argument, then it needs to be the same all over. We can't now be angry for something vile and disgusting that we said and be upset now that we're without a job when 4 or 5 years ago people were being canceled for something they said 15 years ago. Make a logical and reasonable argument for what you believe out of the scriptures. Know the scriptures so you can do that. Armor up, we ride at dawn. May God bless you as always. Have a great day.